Hi, my name is Sharnice Abs, and I will be going over my critter project with you. First things first, I had to do a little research about what these critters were about. I got mealworms. So I learned some of their food preferences. They like damp, decomposing, and moldy items, so molded foods are their go-to. Um, some of the things that it said online for caring for them was to place food and vegetables as a source of moisture and water, to switch out the molded fruits as needed, and to keep them refrigerated to slow down their growth process. Now, I have learned firsthand that it is important to follow said instructions. I had ended up leaving a set of my worms, so I ended up with two sets, but I had ended up leaving a set of my worms at home over the weekend in a hot house. Those were a recipe for a disaster, and they ended up dying. So my first set of worms died, and I ended up getting a second set of worms, which were the ones I did my experiments with. And I got a set of 35 for those. So day one of having my second set of worms, you can see them crawling around. This is them. In this one, you can see that I cut small holes inside of the top of the container lid just to give them some breathing room. In this one, you can see a really dark one. I believe that the little guy was dead before when I flipped him out of the box. I flipped them from the small container that they came in, and I put them in the bigger one just to give them some growing room. But like I said, I do think that little guy was dead when we started. For my first experiment, I did red potatoes versus a Honeycrisp apple. For this experiment, my hypothesis was that they were going to go for the apples because the apples were sweeter. Another thing with that is leaving an apple out causes it to oxidize, causes it to go bad a little bit faster. So this is something that I think that the worms would go for. This is the apples, and this is the potatoes. The materials for this one are 10. I used 10 worms, a Honeycrisp apple, a small one to be exact, and it was about a fourth of a small one. Red potato chunks. I had done a half of a small red potato in a container. This experiment lasted for about an hour. It was from about 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. So I did it for about an hour to get an accurate time frame. So this is the pictures and the videos from the experiment. As you can see in each picture, they kind of moved throughout. This was the first one that I had put them in and let them get acquainted to the container to see where they would go. This was the last one. This is when I first dropped them in. Experiment 1, the data. So I started the experiment at 5:30. I placed all of the worms in the center of the bowl, and I started with 10, like I said. At 5:40, so I gave them about 10 minutes. I checked on them again, and there were 2 on the potatoes, 5 on the apples, and 3 in the center of the bowl. At 5:50, I had 1 on the potatoes, 4 on the apples, and 5 in the center of the bowl. At 6, I had 1 on the potatoes, 8 on the apples, and 1 on the center of the bowl. At 6:10, I had 3 on the potatoes, 2 on the apples, and 5 in the center of the bowl. At 6:20, I had 2 on the potatoes, 5 on the apples, 0 in the center of the bowl. And at 6:30, when the experiment concluded, I had 3 on the potatoes, 7 on the apples, and 0 in the center of the bowl. Like I said, the experiment start time was 5:30, and I ended at 6:30. You can see my data here. After looking at the data table, I have drawn the conclusion that the mealworms preferred the sweet Honeycrisp apple over the red potatoes. This does confirm my initial hypothesis. Experiment number 2, which was dark versus light. My hypothesis was the worms were going to travel to the light because this is when they are most active. I noticed that when I had the worms in the dark, cold refrigerator, they were extremely inactive, and when I let them out to get them some sun, they were a little, or not some sun, some natural lighting, they were a little bit more active. So for this one, I used 10 worms, a shoebox with a small hole in it. The hole is here. printer paper, which was an added modification, and a small container. I started this experiment at 5:45 p.m. and I ended it at 6:25 p.m. So as you can see, this is them crawling out of the box. Like I said, I had to make some slight adjustments to this because they kept trying to get into all of the little nooks and crannies in the shoebox. So I had to take them out, add some copy paper in there to keep them from getting into the small holes in the box. So I started the experiment at 5:45. It started with all of them inside of the dark shoebox. Like I said, I had to modify the box and add white copy paper to it because the worms were crawling out of the top where the second source of light was instead of the hole I had created for them. At 6:05, one of them had fallen out of into the container below, and one was working his way out of the box. At 6:15, there were two of them at the bottom, in the bottom of the container now. And at 6:25, I stopped the experiment because the worms kept crawling into everywhere but where I needed them to go, and I didn't want to chance them getting out and running amok. So the experiment started at 5:45 and it ended at 6:25. Although the box was faulty, I was able to see that the mealworms did in fact want to come into the light and were trying to get into it from any point that they could. All in all, this was a really fun experiment, or a really fun experience. I got a chance to set up my own experiments and kind of see what it would be like, or what it would be like to be a real scientist. I appreciate this experience. Thank you.